discussing today. The international football body FIFA has suspended India due to undue influence from third parties. Remember, this is the most immediate and most grave fallout of this ban is that India will be stripped of the right to host the 2022 Under-17 Women's World Cup, which was scheduled for October. Now, this ban comes after a long-running court battle to courts set the house in order in the AIFF that had politician Praful Patel as its president for over 12 years. Even as questions were raised over how AIFF was being governed, not following the National Sports Code, there have also been inordinate delays in sorting this out and having a new constitution in place despite the Committee of Administrators at the helm. Their draft was only recently ratified by the Supreme Court but is still to be officially adopted by the AIFF. No new elections have taken place yet, and if that wasn't enough, this draft made by the COA is not acceptable to the international governing body FIFA and therefore the ban. The world governing body though has said that it is in touch with the sports ministry and is hopeful of a resolution soon. I want to break down exactly what has led to this. Now, this matter actually dates back to 2017 when Praful Patel's continuing as president was challenged by lawyer Rahul Mehra. A new constitution was to be brought in and elections done, but that matter has been dragged for 5 years and frankly, nobody has come out looking good. The recent situation though was precipitated when Patel's third term ended in December 2020. He clung to it using the SC case which was continuing and wanted his executive committee's term to extend while refusing to hold elections till the issue of a new constitution was settled. The draft constitution was only submitted in court in July 2022. Initially, it was supposed to be submitted in January 2018, 5 years after the ombudsman were first formed. State units, though, have been unhappy with several provisions and they wrote to FIFA about it. Despite FIFA concerns over the draft, the Supreme Court went ahead and ratified the new draft recently. The Supreme Court also asked the AIFF to hold elections soon and announce results before the end of August. It has also approved, by the way, forming an electoral college made up of 36 representatives of state football associations and 36 eminent former football players. Now, this is something FIFA doesn't approve of, and it therefore threatened to suspend AIFF because of third-party interference, which in this case refers to the CEO being in charge. On August 7, COA assured FIFA that the overhaul is on track, but they also slammed Praful Patel. It went on to accuse Patel of engineering a ban by going to FIFA against the committee. Ultimately, because of this clash of egos, FIFA has handed out that ban and opposed certain provisions of the new constitution. Now, here is, in more detail, what FIFA's sticking points are. And, these are not new. India has a history and has past experience with international bodies. So, FIFA opposes court undue influence from third parties. It is against court interference in Indian football. Most international sporting bodies are. They want office bearers of the AIFF to be restored immediately. In other words, the COA to go. They want individual members of electoral college that have been recommended to come from state associations and not as independent members alone. And they want the 25% of former players as co-opted members should be done, but not 50% as has been recommended. So the big question we asked today, exactly who is responsible for this mess? Before we go across to our guests, let's also listen in to what different sides are saying.
थर्ड पार्टी कौन है? हमारा कंट्री का जो सर्वोच्च अदालत है, सुप्रीम कोर्ट, वो थर्ड पार्टी है. हम लोग का साथ फीफा एससी का बात हो गया था. ये 15 सितंबर अंदर नया बॉडी करना चाहिए. हम लोग कोशिश ऑलरेडी हम लोग आरओ रिटर्निंग ऑफिसर एआरओ अपॉइंट किया है. वो लोग काम शुरू कर दिया. I am very much shocked why FIFA do this. Very much shocked. Why?
मैं काफ़ी ऑप्टिमिस्टिक हूँ कि ये कल सॉर्ट आउट हो जाएगा, क्योंकि ये सारे सब बहुत एक्सपीरियंस्ड और बहुत वाइज लोग हैं. जितना जल्दी हो सके सीएए को अपना काम करके एआईएफएफ एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन को हैंड ओवर कर देना चाहिए.
Let me go across to guests joining us. Abhinav Mukherjee is a sports lawyer and also Nandan Kamant, who's a sports lawyer, both joining us on the show. And because this matter is so mired in sports codes and, sports laws or international body laws, I do want to talk to both of you gentlemen to understand the situation here. Abhinav, at the top of it, what the public wants to know
Yes,
is exactly who's responsible for this mess. Where do you think the blame lies? I have already outlined the history and the fact that this case has been dragging on for 5 years, and I don't believe anybody is looking good. But where do you think the blame lies?
So, see, you have to understand one thing, that all these sports associations which are affiliated to international bodies, they have a specific kind of structure. They have specific requirements which have to be complied with and met vis-a-vis the international bodies. Now, this is a framework, it is replicated across, whether it is the Olympic Association or, for instance, football, hockey, everywhere. It's the same thing. Now, what happens is that there are always disgruntled elements in these kind of associations. There may be some shortcomings, because of which matters go to court. The court, in its wisdom and with the intent obviously to protect the rights of what it perceives as having been wronged and to set right things, passes certain orders which ultimately somehow perhaps don't get implemented in the way they should. And that is obviously the fault of the governing bodies of these associations to a large extent. The way
Governing
out
bodies,
perhaps
the ones
would be,
you mean elected
look at the sports
representatives,
code.
or for example, in this case, the COA as well?
No, I don't mean the COA. See, you have to understand the COA is a wing of the court,
Yeah.
and it is tasked with a specific mandate by the court, and it is that mandate which has to be carried out. What I mean is that the people who were perhaps elected, who continued beyond what
Their
they were
term.
required to do, which resulted in members going to court. Now, that could be perhaps taken care of by looking at these international structures, replicating it as is in the domestic structures, looking at the sports code of the Government of India. The 2022 sports code is a very good basis to look at the aspects which need to be incorporated in these constitutions. And we also have to understand that we cannot tinker with the constitutions and setup and the way of working of these associations, because ultimately if you do it in such a way that it conflicts with the international obligations of these bodies, then we land up in these kind of problems. For instance, even in 2012, the Olympic Association had been de-recognized. We made a lot of effort, we got our recognition back. In June itself, there was a threat again that elections are not being held. Now look at it like this, there were 6-7 bodies which were under the court appointed administrators. Many of them couldn't frame constitutions for the last 2-3 years.
Yeah.
Now we need to ask these questions, but why these were not done.
You're right, but I
What
want
held
to
it up?
I want to take a central point of what you
and-
said, Abhinav. You're right. Most for sporting federations have issues. They have had issues, and the public doesn't like that. But I think sometimes we have a tendency to throw the baby out with the bathwater as well. And these matters, when they go to court, become more complicated than getting resolved in good time, frankly. That's also a frustration. Let me take that to Nandan Kamath. Before that, let me also welcome Shabir Ali, who's a former national captain of the football team. Sir, thank you for joining us. Nandan, the question I want to ask you is exactly this. I mean, is this not a classic case, what has happened in the AIFF case, of when non-sports experts and others get involved, things get even more complicated than getting easier? Look at the length of time it has taken to get a new constitution in place for the AIFF.
Yeah, Shivani, so I think while this is to do with football, it's really a game of chess that is being played here.
Right.
So in many ways, this is a sort of we're reaching the end game of this. I mean, there are multiple different stakeholders involved here. And I think this is really the sort of pressure bringing to bear on both the Supreme Court and the Committee of Administrators to start hastening this process. I mean, there have been discussions, there have been back and forth, but this is when it really begins to pinch, right? When players can't play tournaments, when clubs can't represent, trying the pressure that comes from this onto the process. And we have hearings coming up soon, and I think you'll see some sort of responses. There are still more moves to be played, so it'll be interesting to watch. It's been a long process. Leads you to question sometimes why the FIFA intervenes now when there have been lingering issues over many years.
Right.
And comes down to the issue that they do care about the autonomy of sports federations, and maybe sometimes more than sort of the basic
The way
governance
that they are being
principles,
run.
and some of the federations sticking by their own principles.
No, I get that. I think that's a very good point. Shabir Ali, I want you to come in as well. As a former captain, you've of course seen the system. We are facing the ignominy of losing a World Cup, which would have been a very prestigious event. Of course, we are hoping that things will be resolved soon in the next few days and FIFA will overturn its decision. But who do you hold responsible for this?
Hope it will be solved soon. Of course, the federation has not done the election and all. Even FIFA has given the time to COO as well as Supreme Court. But another question comes here, why FIFA didn't interfere before?
Right.
So I hope, as you mentioned in the letter, what FIFA has issued the day before yesterday or yesterday, if the things is okay, then again we will get a chance to conduct the tournament. So you have to blame both the side, you can say. One is federation has not conducted the election, and why FIFA has taken. Even the FIFA is very strict. Even past also they suspended Nigeria and some other countries also because of the third party intervention and all. So hope the things will be okay in a few days. Maybe tomorrow hearing there, Supreme Court will do something. If they do fast, it will be very good for the football. Otherwise, it will be very bad for the football as well as the football players also, those who are preparing for the World Cup.
No, so
Even the
both of you have now
Gokulam
talked
team
about the
also is
timing
out
of
of
the
the
FIFA ban. So, and in fact, Nandan very rightly said that why is FIFA okay with some of the irregularities going on in AIFF? It never intervenes, but the moment the courts and the the COA steps in, it issues a ban. So there is some duplicity there too. But we have to deal with the international body the way it is, whatever its failings may be. But both of you have questioned the timing of the FIFA ban. In this, Mr. Praful Patel, the former president's name has been dragged in. Do you believe that the charge that he instigated FIFA to ban India holds, Mr. Ali?
I don't think, because FIFA, I don't think that will come into anybody talks. Even they have given the time only, you have to finish the election by this time, which I think the Supreme Court or COA or the AFF has not done.
Yeah.
That's why yesterday they have taken the action. Before that only they have got, in the meantime you have to finish all the things. And as I told just now, they suspended Nigeria because of that only, because third party intervention. And as I also said, why FIFA has not come into picture for all this year, maybe 2 years, I think they didn't come into picture. And all of a sudden now 3 months, 4 months to go, and they have just taken the decision.
Right. But at the same time, Mr. Ali, wouldn't it be fair to say that had Mr. Patel not tried to extend his run when there was a limbo of sorts and had exited when his term was over, none of this would have happened. Ultimately, football federation or sporting federations have become personal fiefdoms of sorts, and that's the big battle that is being fought.
Yeah, he delayed maybe because of that only. And again, to a little bit, Supreme Court also taken too much time when the FIFA came, the AFC body came here, and they have given some time. If they would have done in the time frame,
then none of this would
not have happened.
No, you're right. You're right here. I think we took it too lightly, and legal delays have certainly not helped this situation. I want to take another question to Nandan Kaman before I go back to Abhijit as well. Nandan, there are only certain levels to which we can go and not beyond. When it comes to pushing these international bodies, we know that they have their norms. They're not going to change their norms for a particular country, right? In this case, FIFA doesn't want the COA draft as is. They have issues with it. So what was the need for this battle? Why did the COA, not change the draft according to what FIFA was saying?
Yeah, I think that is bound to happen next. So I think there is both the elections as well as redrafting of the constitution that are the pending steps with the COA. And you're going to see some movement there. I think possibly the issue of bringing 36 players into the electoral college might have to be reconsidered. I mean, there are a bunch of different norms, and the reality is that this thing of revoking recognition or suspending recognition, it's coming pretty late in the game, because there's no doubt that over many years, the AIFF has not even stuck by its own constitution with respect to issues such as cooling off and sort of tenure.
Yes.
And it leads you to question why now and why not earlier when there were clear violations. And There are broader issues, Shivani, where in some sense the sports pyramid, in the quest to sort of protect its own autonomy, also has a fair bit of conflicts of interest. It has people who are supposed to be supervised, electing representatives at the international level. So there are elements where you're never going to get beyond a certain level simply because there's a fair bit of self-dealing and self-interest. So, and that's the age-old battle that's been fought over the last 20 or 30 years between the autonomy of international sports federations and the state, which says that if you're going to represent my voice and select my national teams, there are some basic minimum standards that we expect as well. So maybe it's the wrong battle, but it's not a sort of a black and white battle, although it might be, like I said, a little bit of a chess battle. There's going to be pushes, pulls. I think each nation state also has the ability to find its own standards of what it deems to be good governance and fair regulation of sports bodies. So you could call it the wrong battle, but it's a battle perhaps worth fighting and finding some medium-term sort of compromises in between. And I think that's the game that has really begun. International federations aren't going to move very significantly, but they do also need to defer to local standards and local law.
Okay.
And really the question is where the lines are and who's guarding those lines.
Okay. No, I did not mean to suggest that this is the wrong battle at all. I accept that sports federations do need to be cleaned up, but sometimes there is a tendency to go overboard to the extent that those changes take forever to be implemented or they get dragged on in courts. Mr. Mukherjee, I'm coming to you with that question itself. As a sports lawyer, as somebody who has dealt with these issues, is there not a need to deal with such cases in a time-bound manner? In fact, even as we're speaking today, we've had another order come in as far as the IOA is concerned, and God forbid. I mean, we know the IOC too doesn't like government or court interference. God forbid tomorrow the IOA gets suspended.
Yes. So I started with saying that an international body gives an affiliation subject to its own norms. Now, they are not under jurisdiction of any courts. They are not under jurisdiction of the central government. These are all voluntary bodies. They are registered outside. They expect certain minimum standards to be followed. If you tinker with those standards, certainly they will not be able to, recognize you. Now, coming back to the question of why this is being happening in this fashion, see, you have to understand our judiciary today is very overburdened. It is not their primary role to look into these aspects and try to, set things right. So my suggestion would be perhaps these are bodies in India which represent the country on a world stage. My suggestion would be involve the government in a better way. Look at ways of improving the existing structures in tune with the international bodies. Ultimately, the government is the interface between the domestic body and the international body.
Yeah, I mean, just hold your thought. I'm going to come back to you on the role the government can play here. FIFA has said that they're in touch with the sports ministry. Just give me 1 second. Kushal Das, who's the former general secretary of the AIFF, till June 30 this year, in fact, he quit only recently due to health reasons, is joining us on the show. Mr. Das, you've been, of course, a high-ranking official of the AIFF for quite some time. You recently quit. Your term or tenure has coincided almost roughly with that of Praful Patel. The first question I want to ask you is, had Mr. Patel not tried to drag himself as the president or his committee beyond his term, don't you think this entire matter could have been avoided? Ultimately, this started from there, post-December 2020.
Well, I think I would slightly differ there. While, of course, his term finished in 2020, in fact, January 2020, but an application was made to the Supreme Court seeking directions. Now, for whatever reasons, the dates were deferred from time to time. So, at this point in time, I would only say that the application was made, the dates were deferred, and somehow it didn't happen till intervention application was made sometime in 2022. So all I can say is that it's probably slightly incorrect to say that there was no effort made to seek directions from the Supreme Court to hold the elections.
Mr. Das, I'm sure you must have heard the COA has blamed Mr. Patel quite directly for instigating this ban. What do you have to say about that?
I don't think I'm in a position to make a comment on that. As I said, I've been out of the federation for nearly 1.5 months. I've been just following it on social media or in the newspapers, whatever. I do not have any inside information at all. So I think it would not be
But
proper for me to comment
is
on
this
that.
something you believe? This charge is a very serious one. The COA has blamed Mr. Patel for inviting this ban. You worked very closely with him. Do you believe that he could do something like this?
Well, I don't think so. My personal view is I don't think so. But, the COA has blamed. So I do not know what is the basis for their blame. But personally, I haven't faced a situation where, something like this has happened before. So that's my view at this point in time. But
So
I
what do you
believe the
hope now?
COA.
This ban has now come in. We still have some time to hold the elections, get the new constitution adopted, hold the elections, have everybody on board. Are you hopeful that can happen in the timeline that FIFA has set? And we can hold the World Cup, the Under-17 World Cup?
I'm actually very, very optimistic. I don't think there are too many issues here. One issue is about the individual players voting,
Yes.
and the second issue is about finishing off the COA, finishing off the elections as quickly as possible, and handing over to the new elected body. Now, COA has clearly stated that they want to hold the elections. If I remember right, the date is 28th of this month. So that's about 10 days from now. And I think it has already been agreed, from what I've read in the newspapers and in social media, that only the state associations will be part of the electoral college. So I think it is pretty much solved. It is.
Okay.
These are the only two contentious
Sticking points,
points
yes.
which FIFA at this point in time is looking at. And if that is sorted out, then at least the World Cup can be held. And then after that, the constitution can be looked at, and whatever changes are necessary for the good of the game can be implemented. But that, I think, is a long process. It's not going to happen overnight.
Okay.
So I am optimistic that this will happen very quickly and the World Cup will happen.
All right. Abhinav, I want to come back to you very quickly also on the role that the government can play here, because now the government's role becomes very crucial as well. FIFA is in talks with the sports ministry. What do you think, they can do in this situation very quickly?
No, absolutely. The government.
So you
has
have
a
to
big
understand
role
the
to play in
government's
it.
role.
Abhinav, sir. Mr. Das, just hold on. I'm coming back to you. Abhinav, very quickly.
Yes. So we have to understand one thing, that the moment you say that I represent India on the world stage, the government has to be a stakeholder in the process. You cannot have a body without involving the government, because it is the government which has also been giving funds. It is the government which has a sports budget. It is the government which allows you to go outside and play. The government has to be taken as a facilitator in the entire process. It has to iron out the differences and creases and do what is best for the players. We are forgetting that there are under 17 players who have worked hard, trained hard, waiting for this thing to happen, and unfortunately for whatever reasons, 3 years, 4 years, constitutions don't get made, matters are pending in court at the instance of one party or the other, and ultimately it is the nation's image which suffers and the players which suffer, the individual citizens suffer. So obviously you have to involve the government. Government has a very good sports code. We should look at strengthening that kind of system and allowing the elected bodies to function properly.
Okay.
And then take things forward.
I've run out of time. I do thank all of you for joining us and making time. Let's hope. The Supreme Court is obviously seized of the matter. There is a hearing soon as well. Let's hope this matter gets resolved. At least we have to come onto the same page. And then, of course, FIFA will have to change its decision or reverse its decision as well. And that's very important for Indian players.